Many of you know the malady known as Erdnase fever is causing otherwise rational people to engage in illogical theories, reach unsupported conclusions, and generally spin a wheelie on the highway of life. We're going to try to help those people because many of them are my friends. Here's a facsimile copy of the expert at the card table, Erdnase, the annotated Erdnase. Here's a copy of the expert at the card table, published by the Fleming Book Company, one of my favorites. Erdnase. Here's a copy of Erdnase hidden away in Card Mastery by Michael McDougall. It's a little book I actually learned Erdnase from. You see, I pulled the staples and rebound it myself as a teenager so that I could lay the book down flat and learn the moves as well as I could. When I was going to college, these were for sale on a bus station. Always interested me that people in a bus station would buy a copy of Erdnase. No matter how you look at it, this is Erdnase. Now we're going to be spending a lot of time on the title page of Erdnase, what I'll call the title page, this page right here, okay? So let's kind of go over that in the rare instance that there's anyone interested in what it actually says, rather than finding some sort of conspiracy theory contained in the lines. It says, Artifice, Rouge, and Subterfuge at the Card Table, a treatise on the science and art of manipulating cards. This book did not have a dust cover, okay? So if you pick it up, you have to be able to figure out what's it about. And the guy actually tells you. We should keep this in mind since no one else apparently does. Running around making conspiracy theories out of the shape of the letters or something. Give me a frigging break. Embracing the whole calendar of sleights that are employed by the gambler and conjurer, describing with detail and illustration every known expedient, maneuver, and stratagem of the expert card handler, with over 100 drawings from life by M.D. Smith. Pretty straightforward. That's what it's about. You don't have to read anything into it. You can just read what it says. Now over here, we have this cute little introductory preface. Now, this is interesting. You see, this preface is pretty funny. And people seem to think that because it's funny, it must have been written by Mark Twain. Let me explain this to you. Mark Twain and Ambrose Bierce and a bunch of other guys were very popular writers during this period. Everyone read them. Okay? People went to school on their humor. It was sort of a deadpan kind of deal, and other people copied it. That does not make them Mark Twain. That does not make Mark Twain card sharp. But it will not make the innocent vicious, or transform the pastime player into a professional, or make a fool wise, or curtail the annual crop of suckers. But whatever the result may be, if it sells, it will accomplish the primary motive of the author, as he needs the money. Okay, pretty funny. I like that. Okay, it's really not a book on how to cheat at cards. No, it's not a book on how to be a magician. No, it's what the book says it is. It's a treatise on the science and art of manipulating cards. It embraces a whole calendar of sleights. This is not hard to figure out. I know what you're thinking. Why should I waste my time studying Erdnase when I can get a copy of Royal Road to Card Magic and learn how to palm like a duck? So what do we know about Erdnase? Well, not a whole lot. We know we can't find anyone named Erdnase, so that probably wasn't his real name. Although, as David Alexander pointed out, in German it means earth nose. That led David to believe he must have been a mining engineer. Go figure. Anyway, maybe he was. But let me point this out to you before we go any further. There's 8 or 10 people out there that have candidates as to who Erdnase really was. And you know what? In the best of cases, all but one of them are wrong. In the most likely of cases, they're all wrong. So what else do we know? Well, we know that Vernon's friend John C. Sprong went to the publisher, Drake, and said, who wrote this book? Pretty straightforward question. Drake didn't want to go into it too much, but he said, well, the name is an anagram. You can mix up these letters, and you can form a lot of different words, but here's the deal. If you spell it backwards, it's E.S. Andrews. It could be it's an anagram for somebody else's name, and it just happens to spell E.S. Andrews backwards. I don't see the odds in that. So in my view, unless the guy you found is named E.S. Andrews, or something pretty close to it, you got the wrong guy. It's not 100%, but let's face it. Why would he have a different name than that? We know that the book was published in 1902. A lot of things going on in 1902. Let's go over a few of them. One is, the United States was in a tizzy over gambling. You see, during the 1800s, the United States moved from an agricultural nation into one more tuned toward industry. They had railroads, they had the Industrial Revolution, and right around the corner we were going to have airplanes and cars and streetcars and buses and all kinds of stuff. But we also had a drinking problem as a country, and we had a lot of gambling going on. And as women moved into the workforce, and as men and women moved into cities, and as men came home every Friday night drunk on their ass, having lost their check in a gambling hall, women, for some strange reason, were getting pissed off. So what did they do? They did 3 things. They got rid of gambling, they got rid of booze, and they got the vote. Now, this took them a while. By 1902, we were only a few years away from every state in the Union making gambling illegal. Okay? And by 1902, several already had. So the die was kind of cast. I mean, here's a picture of some of the women who were after these guys. These gamblers did not have a great reputation. Also, what else do we have? We had a series of economic setbacks. These were called panics or recessions or whatever, but before, during, and after 1902, these were hitting the United States one after another as this industrial nation began to wrestle with banking and fraud and all kinds of other stuff that they didn't have as a problem when they were out on the plains landing some corn. Okay, it's a different ball game now. So Erdnase could have actually needed the money. He could have needed the money anyway, but times were not the greatest for gamblers. Times were not the greatest in the economy, and apparently times were not the greatest for Erdnase. Now, the Erdnase book is full of drawings. As we've seen, the book claims they were drawn from life by M.D. Smith. M.D. Smith was an actual guy. He lived up until the 1970s. They found him in the 1940s. They asked him, do you remember doing these drawings? And what did he say? Yeah, I do. I sketched them up, and then when the guy liked them, I took them home and I inked them in. So, it's pretty logical, I think, for us to conclude that M.D. Smith did the drawings from life, because that's what the book says. Now, could he have done them from photographs? Sure. You remember photographs in 1902? They're on big glass plates, You hold this thing up that explodes to give enough light to make the thing. And that poor little Erdnase is out there getting, over 100 of these things made, and then looking at them and throwing this one out and whatever, and having a guy make drawing. No, he's not going to do that. Maybe he had a Brownie camera. Cheap, huh? Well, they had Brownie cameras in 1902. They'd been around for about 3 years, and they had no viewfinder. And some people got, over a long period of time, really good at these. But most people, even with a viewfinder, take ridiculous pictures. Okay? But without one, you're going to knock off a bunch of pictures, take them in, have them developed, take them to the artist. Come on. I'm not going to do that. I don't think. Is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? Yeah, I don't think so. Another thing that ticks me off, irritates me, makes me want to go bonkers, I don't know, applies to virtually all the Erdnase descriptions I've read. And what they do is they set up a premise, and then they go through a bunch of stuff to support their premise. At the end, you say, oh yeah, they must have proved a guy. No. They didn't prove anything because the premise was faulty. Let me give you an example of that, not to pick on one guy, but artifice, ruse, and subterfuge. Apparently, there's something mysterious about this because they all mean the same thing. Guess what? They don't all mean the same thing, but they're close. So why would anyone write that? Let me tell you why they would write it. Because it sounds cool. Because it almost rhymes. Because it flows trippingly off the tongue. Artifice, rouge, and subterfuge. It's the kind of thing Ricky Jay used to just toss out there all the time. Is there something mysterious about that? If we find something mysterious, does it mean he put them in because of that? No, it doesn't. Am I really to believe that a guy that spent all this time writing this book, spelled his name backwards, that wasn't enough for him? No, he had to put together a title page full of all kinds of secret information so that 120 years later, people could decipher it. Oh my God, you can't believe this, can you? Come on, guys. Now, as soon as Di Vernon died, people came out of the woodwork to accuse him of being a bad parent, whatever that means. You're going to check out some other magicians if you want to find out what a bad parent really is. Anyway, they also decided to tear his hero down because it made him feel good to, to say that they knew more than Vernon or whatever. Not all, but a couple of guys concluded Erdnase wasn't a gambler. Now, let me point this out to you. In 1902, if Erdnase was 62 years old, he could have fought in the Civil War. And he could have learned how to gamble in the Civil War. Not only that, as I pointed out previously, everyone in America was running around gambling. So the idea that the guy who writes a book full of card sleights on how to cheat at cards gives you all kinds of information on how gamblers' sleights work and stuff isn't a gambler because he doesn't comport to what some underworld sleazeball gambler was in 1953. doesn't mean anything. You can't tell me he wasn't a gambler unless you can tell me who he was. Okay? You don't know whether he was a gambler or not. Why wasn't he a gambler? Look at the way he tells you how to hold the cards in this funky way, or else spreading them out. The way if he tells you to look at your hand like this. This could also mean that he was used to playing with cards without indices, which would seem to place him in one of the older generations. Why would someone put that in there if they didn't know about gambling? Why would somebody be trying to invent the perfect shift? Is it possible he wasn't a gambler? Sure, it's possible. Can you prove it here, 120 years later? I don't think so. Now, a lot of people with their candidate for Erdnase have managed to tie him in somehow with Chicago, with cards, and with the ability to ride on trains. Great. What an accomplishment. Let me explain to you where Chicago is. It's on the Great Lakes. You know what the Great Lakes connect to? They connect to the Atlantic Ocean. You know what the Atlantic Ocean connects to? Besides Europe? The rest of the world! Chicago is right next to Canada. The guy could have been a Canadian. Chicago in 1902 could be reached by steamboat, by railroad train, by horseback, by stagecoach, by walking, by anything you can think of. Anyone could be in Chicago in 1902. My grandmother was in Chicago in 1902. My grandmother's not Erdnase. Well, probably. What else? Ooh. They had cards. They knew some card tricks. Ooh. Oh, let's get excited over that. Let me explain something to you. In 1902, everyone played cards. There was nothing else to do. Well, you could play checkers. You could buy some sheet music and play it on a piano while your sister sang. You could... I don't know. That's pretty much it. A lot of people knew magic tricks. They put them in newspapers. They put them in magazines. You could go to your Uncle Charlie and ask him to tell you how he pulled a nickel out of your ear. This does not make you Erdnase. This is stupid. This is idiotic. If you want to tie them in to S.W. Erdnase, you need something that, in the general realm of conversation would be evidence. I don't mean to confuse you with this term, but let's say you had a check written by the publisher to a guy named Joe Andrews, and it said, payment, for copies of your book we sold. This would be good, huh? Suppose you found a manuscript in Granny's attic, and then there was the whole book there. And it was signed by Joe Blow. This would be good. This would be nice. Suppose you had a letter to the Sphinx saying, I wrote this book, I'd like you to publish my advertisement, signed by, little Mikey Perovich. This would be good. This would be good. It wouldn't be proof, but it would be evidence. Let me tell you what isn't evidence. The guy played cards on a train. Lots of people took trains because it was basically the only efficient means of transportation in the world. And people played cards on trains because they were looking for something to do. People got cheated on cards on trains. None of this makes your candidate Erdnase. Okay? Let's talk for a minute about the title page. This is like a smorgasbord for conspiracy theorists. They're finding information in the triangle. They're spelling words backwards. They're taking the first letter of every line. You know, there's a guy named Tom Sawyer. He wrote about Erdnase. Tom Sawyer's different than the rest of these guys. He actually has a functioning brain. Okay? So Tom pointed out that these little triangles are in all kinds of books of that period. I'm going to show you one right here. It's a guy I wrote Martin Gardner about, not because I thought he was Erdnase, but because Di Vernon said, why don't you ask him if he looked into this guy, since his name is E.S. Andrews. Well, here's the title page of a book by E.S. Andrews. You see, it's in a triangle. At the bottom, it references illustrations. The title's at the top. It tells what the book is about. Does that make this guy Erdnase? No, it doesn't. Here's a newspaper article. Mrs. E.S. Andrews. What's she up to? She's having the Bridge Club meet at her house. Cards. The right name. She must be Erdnase. She's not Erdnase. Now, here's another great theory that frosts my wick. I don't know what to say about this. Okay. The magic section, conjuring, and the gambling section, card table artifice, were written by two different people. Because why? Because let me explain to you, once again, what the book is about. It embraces the whole calendar of sleights that are employed by the gambler and the conjurer. It's a treatise on the science and art of manipulating cards. So what does this tell us? The guy wants to teach you about artistic card handling in 1902. And where would he go for that information? The gambler and the magician. Is there someone else out there he should have consulted, like a hot dog vendor? I don't know. I don't see it. Seems pretty straightforward to me, but let me point something out to you that maybe a lot of people haven't tripped on yet. Di Vernon, yes, I knew him, once asked me, what do all the things in Erdnase have in common? What's a common thread throughout the book? Unfortunately, I don't remember the right answer to this question. It might have had to do with most of the stuff you could do while working alone. But my answer was, he uses the little finger for everything. And kind of goes like this. He thinks for a second, he smiles, and he says, yeah, you're right. Here are some sleights from the card table artifice section that use the little finger in kind of unusual ways. And here are some from the magic section. This guy likes sleight of hand, okay? and he wants to teach you about sleight of hand. And so he brings these two groups together. Does this mean he was two different people? Well, he could be, but why? Does somebody think he put some card tricks in at the end so people could learn a card trick to do? No. No, it's not about that. It's about individual sleights, the whole calendar of sleights. Of course, not everything is in there, but most basic stuff and a lot of sophisticated stuff is in there. Seems pretty straightforward to me. You know, some people made the point that Erdnase was a very good writer. And other people say, well, I'm not such a good writer. I don't see anything great about this. Well, this is a technically written book. What people have actually said is he's a great technical writer. The book is short. The book is succinct. The book is to the point. There's all kinds of stuff in there that's crammed into this little tiny book. And if you go back to that period of time and look at other books on sewing or wood carving or something, you'll find that none of them, including the magic books of the time, have this facility that he had to directly and exquisitely explain stuff. I mean, this is part of the reason that it's valuable. It's valuable because it's so well written technically. Okay? Now, a lot of people have said, well, he must have been educated because he wrote this book. He could have gotten educated in a lot of ways. He could have lived on a plantation, gotten homeschooled or tutored or something. Could have lived out on a prairie and his mom could have taught him. You see, a guy writing in 1902, it's got to be at least 20 years old, 20, 40, 60, something like this. He's from the 1800s. The amount that you could learn in the 1800s is a lot less than it is now. There was all kinds of things you didn't have to know then. But one thing you did have to know was how to write a letter, because there was no other means of communication. Well, that's not true. You could buy your own telegraph line. You could buy a heliotrope, but no. Basically, people wrote letters. That's how they communicated. And so they were taught how to write. And people that had a natural facility for writing learned how to write because they were writing all the time. That's how people communicated. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have computers. They didn't have a whole lot of things, but they had the mail. Okay? Erdnase could have been highly educated, or he could have been self-educated. We just don't know. Another thing we hear is that all these sleights were published earlier somewhere else. Well, you can say that about a lot of books, but the point is they weren't written about with this sort of specificity and technical knowledge and direct information just pouring at you out of the pages of the book. And to assume that Erdnase learned all this stuff from his vast library of conjuring and gambling books is, in my view, unwarranted. Okay? He doesn't know what books are published. How would he know? He's going to go on the internet and do a search? He might have come across a couple of them, but it's much more likely that he learned all this information, or a lot of it, from an acquaintance. Or he learned it by being cheated at cards and figuring out what the guy did. Or he sort of came up with certain things because he knew what needed to be accomplished and he figured out a way to do it. Okay? There aren't any books that cover this stuff the way he did. You might find some obscure description of something somewhere, but it doesn't really give you the information you need to correctly perform it. I don't accept that. You can't say, oh, I found a book in 1620 in Italy in a monk's house. and Erdnase obviously got it from him. Well, no, it's stupid. Stop doing this. So where does all this leave us? Well, no one knows who he was. People are telling you they know who he was. They don't know. Okay? He can't be alive because too much time has gone by. He could have been alive when Jay Marshall and Di Vernon and Johnny Sprong and Martin Gardner were looking for him, but he can't be alive now. But I'm sure he'd like you to just read his book, try to learn the slights that are in there. It will make a better person of you. Look, those really are the aces. I wouldn't kid you, really. Well, look. Look, those are the aces. What'd you think they were? The threes, well, you can't be too sure.